In our headlines on this Thursday afternoon, January 18th, here on the Korean Peninsula. Moscow looks to advance its ties with Pyongyang in all areas, including the sensitive, according to the Kremlin on Wednesday. The remarks come amid trilateral talks here in Seoul with nuclear delegates from Tokyo and Washington in response to Pyongyang's hostile ambitions. Over in the Middle East, U.S. military authorities engage in a fourth round of strikes against land-based Houthi targets in Yemen in less than a week on Wednesday, as the rebels maintain their assaults against commercial ships in regional waters. Also on Wednesday, Samsung Electronics hosted an Unpacked event at San Jose to share its latest Galaxy innovations that offer an unprecedented mobile experience fueled by artificial intelligence. We start in Russia, where the Kremlin says talks between President Vladimir Putin and North Korea's top diplomat Choe Son-hui was centered on bolstering bilateral ties, including, quote, in sensitive areas. Our Choe Son-hui has details.
North Korea and Russia are looking to strengthen their ties during North Korean Foreign Minister Choe Son-hui's visit to Moscow. They have discussed enhancing bilateral relations in all areas, including sensitive areas, according to Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov on Wednesday. No specific details were given regarding the sensitive areas, but they seem to involve military cooperation. Military cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang has been deepening since the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, with the North providing arms to Russia in exchange for Russia providing technical assistance. North Korea has expressed a proactive stance in joint actions, particularly on the Korean Peninsula. The Kremlin called the North its closest neighbor and partner.
We confirm our principled position supporting the inclusive and fair resolution of existing problems. We have always supported the start of negotiations without preconditions in order to work for lasting peace and stability throughout Northeast Asia.
Moreover, the two have agreed to cooperate on food supply, mining development and cultural exchanges. According to the officials, Russia will supply North Korea with food like corn, and the North will cooperate with Russia on the extraction of minerals such as gold and rare earth elements. Also, Pyongyang will permit group tourism for Russians starting February, marking the first time it will allow tourists in 4 years since its lockdown due to the COVID-19. Putin's potential visit to Pyongyang may have also been discussed, but was not mentioned publicly. Choe Son-hui, Arirang News.
Here in Seoul on this Thursday, nuclear delegates of South Korea, Japan and the U.S. are addressing North Korea's hostile weapons ambitions amid concerns over related collaboration with Russia. Kim Gon and his U.S. counterpart Chung Pak and Japanese counterpart Hiroyuki Namatsu are gathered here to explore efforts to better respond to security concerns on the peninsula. Earlier on Wednesday, bilateral talks between the delegates of Seoul and Tokyo called for tougher defense initiatives with Washington. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is assessing North Korea's space capabilities, and the level of threat posed by the regime remains unclear at present. Remarks to this end were made on Wednesday by John Plum, First Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy. He did, however, point out the U.S. would take North Korea's space endeavors, quote, seriously if it showed signs of warfare capabilities. North Korea claims it marked a successful spy satellite launch in November and plans to launch 3 more this year. A trilateral maritime drill among South Korea, Japan and the U.S. in waters of Jeju Island came to a close on Wednesday after a broad display of might in light of North Korea's hostile weapons intentions. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung has more.
South Korea, the U.S. and Japan held a trilateral maritime exercise in waters of Jeju Island from Monday to Wednesday in a show of force against North Korea and its escalating security threats. The Joint Chiefs of Staff said Wednesday that a total of 9 ships participated, including Seoul's Aegis-equipped destroyer Sejong the Great, the U.S. aircraft carrier Carl Vinson, and Tokyo's Kongo-class destroyer. This is reportedly the largest number of ships to take part in a drill by the 3 countries. The last time the USS Carl Vinson made a stop in South Korea was 2 months ago, ahead of North Korea's spy satellite launch. The nuclear-powered aircraft carrier is roughly 3 soccer fields long, has a crew of around 6,000, and carries more than 90 aircraft, including FA-18 Super Hornet fighter jets. This time around, the Trilateral exercise comes amid heightened tensions following North Korea's recent test firing of what it claims was a hypersonic missile. The JCS said the aim was to improve deterrence capabilities against North Korea's nuclear and maritime security threats, including the ability to intercept the transportation of weapons of mass destruction. It's the first three-way exercise to be held after the three nations established a multi-year exercise plan last December to better counter growing provocations from Pyongyang.
The exercise seems to be in line with the Washington Declaration between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo, and also to strengthen extended deterrence in response to North Korea's recent artillery drills and the launch of an intermediate-range ballistic missile.
Professor Yang added that although such exercises may have a deterrence effect, North Korea's continued attempts at using such exercises as justification for their provocations may bring about further tension on the peninsula. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
And turning to the unrest in the Middle East, U.S. defense forces have launched yet another series of strikes against land-based Houthi targets in Yemen, while U.S. security authorities place the rebels back on their list of terrorist groups. Our Isinje has the latest.
Washington on Wednesday redesignated Yemen's Houthi rebels as specially designated global terrorists amid tensions in the Red Sea region. The announcement comes after the U.S. launched strikes on Houthi targets in Yemen in response to the militant group's attack on commercial ships in the Red Sea. According to a written statement from White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on Wednesday, the designation is an important tool to impede terrorist funding to the Houthis, further restrict their access to financial markets, and hold them accountable for their actions. The National Security Advisor added that if the Houthis cease their attacks in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, the designation would be re-evaluated as it does not take effect for 30 days. And according to the Israel Defense Forces Chief of Staff on Wednesday, the likelihood of Israel being drawn into a war in Lebanon against Hezbollah is growing. The IDF chief said Israel was increasing readiness for fighting in Lebanon as it looks to stabilize its northern border. He added that the Israeli military would apply lessons it had learned from fighting in Gaza if it embarks on a campaign to push Hezbollah and others threatening Israel away from the border. Meanwhile, the head of the Palestine Investment Fund said Wednesday that at least $15 billion will be needed to rebuild houses in Gaza, explaining the scale of devastation caused by Israel's offensive. The group's chairman cited international reports saying 350,000 housing units had been completely or partially damaged in Gaza. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics has shared its Galaxy S24 series, pledging an unprecedented mobile experience powered by artificial intelligence. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
The South Korean tech giant has unveiled its first AI smartphone, the Galaxy S24 series. This lineup includes the S24, the S24 Plus, and the S24 Ultra, boasting various functions backed by artificial intelligence.
As mobile devices become the primary access point for AI, Samsung Galaxy will be an open gateway for secure and meaningful AI experiences on a global scale.
The most significant feature is the on-device AI, which allows users to enjoy the cutting-edge technology of generative AI without connection to the cloud. The Galaxy S24 series comes with Live Translate, providing two-way, real-time voice and text translations during phone calls, breaking down language barriers. No third-party apps are required, and on-device AI ensures complete privacy for conversations. In collaboration with Google, Samsung has introduced the Circle to Search feature. While browsing the web or using social media, users can simply draw a circle on the screen to search for the information instantly without the need to switch to other apps. Thanks to AI, the camera quality has improved compared to its previous model. With upgraded features like nitography, photos and videos shot are clear even when using the zoom feature in low-light environments, such as at night. With its Galaxy AI editing tools, it can also fill in parts of an image background. If an object needs a slight adjustment, AI allows users to move the subject and generates a perfectly blended background in its original spot. Some experts have questioned the need for AI smartphones, expressing concern about whether on-device AI can offer truly new experiences, especially given that numerous useful apps already exist. However, one expert says it differs from existing services.
The fact that AI services are provided more quickly, even in offline environments, adds unique appeal. Now, the question is how widely this new experience will spread. I expect that AI smartphones will introduce a whole new dimension, fostering widespread adoption.
The S24 Ultra is priced from $1,300. The S24 Plus will cost $1,000, and the S24 will retail at $800. The series will be available in stores across the world from January 31st. 신하영, Arirang News.
In other news, Korea's Webtoon industry expanded further in 2022 to mark the 5th consecutive year of growth. According to Seoul's Culture Ministry on Thursday, the industry raked in over $1.3 billion in sales in 2022, up almost 17% on year. Despite the favorable findings for the industry as a whole, annual earnings for Webtoon writers fell by over $15,000 on year amid greater competition. Meanwhile, the Culture Ministry is poised to unveil plans to better support the industry within this month. Korea's financial regulator has pledged tax reforms in better support of individual investors. Our Moon Hye-ryun explains.
Cutting taxes on stock transactions in stages and offering interest payment refunds are just some of the reforms announced by the Financial Services Commission at a government policy briefing open to the public on Wednesday. President Yoon led the briefing and stressed the need to revitalize the capital market.
대한민국에는 글로벌 경쟁력을 갖춘 글로벌 기업들이 많이 있습니다만은 우리의 주식 시장은 매우 저평가되어 있습니다. 우리 시장 역시 다른 나라 시장과 경쟁하고 있기 때문에 글로벌 스탠다드에 맞지 않는 자본시장 규제를 과감하게 혁파해야 됩니다.
The first rung on the proposed ladder of financial opportunity comes in the form of scrapping the capital gains tax on income from financial investments that were due to be introduced next year. With its implementation, investors who earned more than a certain amount through stock investments would have to pay at least 20% tax. But now it's being dropped in a bid to boost investor sentiment. Lowering the stock transaction tax had been proposed as a means to combat the capital gains tax. But even with the latter being written off, it's still set to be lowered to 0.15% by 2025. Furthermore, the government will be carrying out a makeover to its individual saving account products as early as next month, by more than doubling the maximum limit on the non-taxable amount through the scheme, but also introducing a new type of ISA that's focused on domestic stock investments. Authorities predict that people will be able to see up to just over $1 million of tax benefits if they subscribe to an ordinary ISA for the minimum requirement of 3 years, which is more than double the amount before the reform. Other than tax reforms, the government has pledged to aid people in managing debt through interest reduction plans, especially for financially vulnerable groups such as self-employed workers and small business owners. Some 1.87 million such people who have taken out loans from banks will be eligible to receive up to 3 million won each in interest payment refunds. Another new policy that will be put into practice to help people start the new year on a new page is renewing overdue loan payment records. Up to 2.9 million people can improve their credit scores should they repay the full overdue amount by May this year. Moon Hye-ryun, Arirang News.
Also in local news, Korea's Jeollabuk-do Province has launched itself as a special autonomous province. The launch comes in line with the Yoon administration's broader national strategy to foster balanced regional growth. That being said, earlier on this Thursday, Jeollabuk-do became the 3rd province in the country to acquire self-governing status, granting it the authority to shape and practice policies independent of the central government. Accordingly, the largely rural area is expected to adopt visa and employment regulations that allow for a greater presence of foreign laborers in the province. At the launch ceremony today, President Yoon Suk-yeol reaffirmed his commitment to supporting locally driven growth initiatives for national prosperity. Over in the Swiss ski resort of Davos, leaders at this year's World Economic Forum are highlighting the importance of action over words with regard to tackling climate change, as the head of the United Nations calls for tangible efforts to phase out fossil fuels. Our Ian Jin reports.
The climate crisis is in the spotlight at this year's annual World Economic Forum underway in Davos as one of the most alarming risks over the next decade. On Wednesday, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres reminded leaders of governments and businesses that the phase-out of fossil fuels is essential and inevitable to avoid a global climate catastrophe.
Let me be very clear again. The phase-out of fossil fuels is essential and inevitable. No amount of spin or scare tactics will change that. Let's hope it doesn't come too late.
The UN chief emphasized that our planet is still heading for a scorching 3 degrees increase in global temperatures, and natural disasters like droughts, storms, fires, and floods are destroying countries and communities. He alarmed leaders by stating that while 2023 went down as the hottest year on record, but could be considered cool compared to temperatures in the future. The EU's Copernicus Climate Change Service revealed just last week that 2023 had been the hottest year on record, with major implications for keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. That followed the recent COP28 climate summit in Dubai, where nearly 200 countries agreed to begin reducing global consumption of fossil fuels to avert the worst of climate change. Meanwhile, International Monetary Fund Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said that countries need to shift some $7 trillion in direct and indirect annual subsidies for fossil fuels to help finance the fight against climate change, adding that the price of subsidies need to be set at $85 per ton by 2030. And John Kerry, the outgoing U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, affirmed that the transition toward clean energy and electric vehicles will not be interrupted, regardless of who wins the 2024 U.S. presidential election, adding that a revolution is underway that is much bigger than any politician or any one person. Ian Jin, Arirang News.
Back here in Korea, we are counting down exactly 1 day to the 2024 Winter Youth Olympics in Gangwon-do Province, and the head of the International Olympic Committee has cast his vote of confidence in the event's success. My colleague Song Yoo-jin covers his remarks.
All is set for a successful Winter Youth Olympic Games. These are the words of Thomas Bach, the president of the International Olympic Committee, regarding Gangwon 2024, as the Games are known. The IOC head took a tour on Wednesday of the Youth Olympic Village in Gangneung, one of 2 athletes' villages for the Games. Accompanying him was Choi Jong-gu, the executive president of the Gangwon 2024 organizing committee. As a former athlete himself, his utmost interest is in the well-being of all those competing in the Games. President Bach's first stop was the fitness center, where the athletes can keep themselves in shape. He also made sure to motivate the young athletes to chase their dreams, promising to meet them again at the 2026 Milano Cortina Winter Olympics.
You will follow in the footsteps of your Olympic greats. You're on the best way.
The next stop, the Athlete 365 House, where the athletes' education program is in full swing. This program aims to educate young athletes about safety in sports, mental health, and injury prevention. President Bach was joined by 2 athlete role models for Gangwon 2024, Olympic silver medalist Won Yoon-jong and Jackie Naricott, who will serve as mentors to the young athletes throughout the Games. He also took the time to meet with athletes from Ukraine.
We are with you. All the best.
After taking a look around the athletes' residence, President Bach didn't hide his impression of the village.
What I'm hearing from the athletes, they're all very happy, and you know what for athletes is the most important is good sleep and good food. And they all confirmed.
And before joining the athletes for lunch at the dining hall, this was his message for all the young competitors.
It's a great stepping stone then also for the Olympic Games one day. So what I can tell them is, enjoy this experience and then get ready for a great competition. Give it your best and then continue after to do the next step, and this is participation in the Olympic Games.
송유진, 아리랑 뉴스, 강릉.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. In Thailand, an explosion at a fireworks factory has left at least 23 dead. The fireworks factory, located in the Thai province of Suphanburi, some 120 kilometers north of Bangkok, was completely destroyed by the explosion, with no signs of any survivors so far. Local police said that the cause of the explosion is yet unclear. No damage was caused to other buildings as the factory was located between rice fields. Fireworks factory explosions and accidents are not uncommon in Thailand. One worker at the same factory was killed in an accident in 2022. And last year, at least 12 people were killed and 121 injured in an explosion at a fireworks warehouse that damaged more than 100 homes. In France, President Emmanuel Macron announced a wide range of policies on Tuesday in an effort to reinvigorate support amid growing unpopularity. And among those measures are plans to address France's declining birth rate by reforming childbirth leave and combat infertility. Macron said future parental leave will be better paid, albeit shorter than the current parental leave, and will enable both parents to be with their child for 6 months if they so wish. Under the current system, parents can take leave from work until a child turns 3, but the payment of around $435 per month means most parents don't make use of the policy. France's birth rate dropped to 1.68 children per female in 2023, the lowest since 1946. In Kenya, a judge on Wednesday ordered mental health evaluations for cult leader Paul Mackenzie and 30 associates before they are charged with the murder of 191 children. Mackenzie, the head of the Good News International Church, was arrested last April after 429 bodies, including those of children, were found in graves west of the town of Malindi in southern Kenya. Authorities say the doomsday cult leader had ordered his followers to starve themselves and their children to death so they could reach heaven before the end of the world. Kenyan prosecutors said they will charge a total of 95 suspects on counts of murder, manslaughter, terrorism, and torture in what is one of the world's worst cult-related tragedies in recent history. Pet owners and farmers flock to the Vatican to have their animals blessed for St. Anthony's Day. Every year, members of the Association of Italian Breeders gather at St. Peter's Square for the event. January 17th marks the anniversary of the death of 4th century Christian St. Anthony the Abbot, the patron saint and protector of domestic animals, who gave his inheritance to the poor and lived a monastic life in the desert only with animals. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Southern provinces are seeing lingering precipitation from yesterday, while Jeollabuk-do provinces will see more showers until this afternoon. Those in Gyeongsang-do provinces need to keep an umbrella handy through tonight, with 5 to 30 millimeters of rain in the forecast. Meanwhile, Jeju Island will see heavier showers. Those in the east of Gangwon-do need to brace for snowfall from this morning through this weekend. And until tomorrow, they could see up to 15 centimeters of heavy snowfall, with a heavy snow advisory possibly issued. Temperatures spiked to 10 degrees Celsius this afternoon here in Seoul, so hopefully the warmth melts all the lingering ice on the roads. The warming trend continues tomorrow as well. Central areas notice a big jump in highs, and the southern provinces will have highs that are slightly higher than yesterday. Gangwon-do and southern regions will see more rain this weekend. That next week there will be a blast of numbing cold sweeping into the country. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And those are the headlines at this hour here in Korea. Coming up next is our panel session. Do stay with us.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
Wednesday last week, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission gave its nod of approval to certain investment companies for spot Bitcoin exchange-traded funds. So what are the broader implications of this latest development? Why is Korea's financial regulator warning against it? And how are pundits assessing its merits and setbacks? Welcome to Thursday's edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today we touch upon the broader implications of the US's recent green light for spot Bitcoin exchange-traded funds. For this, I have Professor Greg Buchak at Stanford University live on the line. Professor Buchak, welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Park Min-jung at Kumo National Institute of Technology with us live on the line as well. Professor Park, it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Professor Buchak, let's start off then with some details about the latest green light, which I understand comes after more than a decade. So why the approval now and what has been the response?
Sure. So the Securities and Exchange Commission gave its approval to 11 spot Bitcoin ETFs. The sponsors of these funds include major financial institutions. You've probably heard of them like BlackRock and Fidelity. And these funds are now available for everyday investors to access on kind of standard brokerage accounts. Now, I'll be upfront. I think the SEC too, am a bit of a Bitcoin and crypto skeptic. There's a lot of very smart people working on interesting math and computer science kind of behind these technologies. But I sort of think, after a few decades, after about 15 years, Bitcoin and crypto more generally sort of seem like a solution in search of a problem. I'm sure you've heard all of this sort of scandals and scams around the industry. I think that's kind of indicative of the fact that there's not a lot of real economic need for this, because if there were, I think people would be doing more kind of real things with it and fewer scams. So rather, this really seems like it's all about financial speculation. And I think with that context, the SEC has been hesitant to approve spot Bitcoin ETFs. But amid growing investor pressure to do this, and with a court ruling against them, they went ahead with allowing them. So to give you some broader context, there were already many ways to invest in Bitcoin. You could sort of own Bitcoin directly in your digital wallet. You could buy it on an exchange. You could buy a publicly traded fund that owned Bitcoin futures rather than spot Bitcoin. We'll talk about that in a second. And then there are also sort of private investment vehicles that weren't marketed towards the general public that owned spot Bitcoin, and the SEC's prohibition didn't extend to them. But the SEC's decision here sort of adds one more way for ordinary investors to speculate on Bitcoin. It's not really revolutionary given what was already available, but broadly, I think there's some excitement around this because it's even more accessible now for ordinary investors.
Right, and before we delve further into the pros and cons of this particular approval, Professor Buchak, in simple terms, what exactly is meant by exchange-traded funds? And also, as you mentioned, Bitcoin futures exchange-traded funds had already been approved by the Securities and Exchange Commission in the year 2021. So what is the main difference between Bitcoin spot exchange-traded funds and Bitcoin futures exchange-traded funds?
Sure. So we'll see if we can do this in about a minute. An exchange-traded fund is an investment fund that owns some underlying assets. So people sort of buy and sell that fund on an exchange. You don't directly own the underlying asset. Rather, you own a fund, and that fund owns the underlying asset. So why do we have things like this? Well, sort of long story short, it makes it easier for an ordinary investor to buy certain assets or certain sets of assets. So for example, if I want to buy a diversified portfolio of stocks, rather than buying 500 stocks myself, I can buy one fund, and then that fund manager will buy those 500 stocks on my behalf. So it sort of makes that whole process a lot easier. A Bitcoin ETF is just an ETF where the underlying asset is Bitcoin or some financial asset related to Bitcoin. Now, this distinction between a Bitcoin futures ETF and a spot Bitcoin ETF, so the futures ETF was already allowed. The spot Bitcoin ETF is what was recently approved. What's the difference? So a spot Bitcoin ETF is pretty straightforward. That's the ETF owns the actual Bitcoin. That's how you would think of doing this. What a Bitcoin futures ETF is a little bit more convoluted. So instead of owning the actual Bitcoin, it owns a financial derivatives contract called a futures contract. And a Bitcoin futures contract says you have to deliver to me Bitcoin on a future date for an agreed upon price. And in the meantime, if the price goes up, that person with the contract earns money. So it's kind of a synthetic way to get exposure to Bitcoin prices. Now, if buying a fund that buys a contract to buy Bitcoin in the future sounds very convoluted, it is very convoluted. The reason that the SEC was kind of more okay with this than the spot ETF is that these futures trade on regulated exchanges. So there's more legal protection there, and the SEC was sort of more comfortable with that. Now, an appeals court in the US said that actually this distinction is sort of not super relevant. It's not a big enough reason to disallow spot Bitcoin ETFs. And that's kind of what led the SEC to approve spot Bitcoin ETFs.
Right, and that approval came last Wednesday. Now, Professor Park, what has been the response from Korea's Financial Services Commission about partaking in US Bitcoin ETFs?
Yeah, actually, Korea's FSA, we call the Finance Service Commission, responded that actually Korea has a different legal system from U.S., so it is very hard to apply directly U.S.'s cases right now. And also, it said in a statement recently that listed EU-as Bitcoin's ETF may violate Korean law existed in the recent. And also, FSC addressed that the intermediation by domestic security firms in Korea for U.S. Bitcoins, which are listed in overseas, can have risks to conflict with the government's current stances on virtual assets and the provision of Market Capital Acts. Actually, these days, the Market Capital Act in Korea listed some virtual assets, including Bitcoin, but they are not included in ETF, Bitcoin's ETF, and all of cryptocurrencies. So they said it is hard to adopt directly in US's cases from right now. And also, they have decided to this Bitcoin's ETF cannot have fall over under the category of product investments in cryptocurrency market now.
Right, I see. And Professor Park, how would you explain the Korean financial regulators' cautious stance?
Yes, but these days, as I said, the Korea's FSC and financial authorities show some of stances very cautiously now. So there are a lot of reasons to show why the Korea shows that stances, but a lot of factors are combined. But we can infer that it is directly related to the stability of financial market or financial institutions or some of the purpose for protect investment. Well, actually, these days we already know that cryptocurrency has some very high price, extreme fluctuations. So Korean governments and FSC and also a lot of financial institutions try to protect investors in advance. So also we can imagine and explain that stance. But Korea's financial authorities and government have time to develop some regulatory systems or technology advancements in advance to protect investors in advance.
Right, so we're taking a proactive approach to better protecting our private investors then. And Professor Buchak, then staying with this cautious stance, if I were to ask you to perhaps highlight one potential major Bitcoin ETF threat, what would you point to, and how prepared are we to address it?
Sure, so I think there's kind of a technical security threat, and then there's like a consumer protection threat that has been brought up. So let me tell you what I think is a sort of security threat here. The security threat is really in kind of the details of the implementation of the Bitcoin ETF. So when you're creating this ETF, this Bitcoin ETF, the fund actually has to own underlying Bitcoin somehow. And that's kind of easy in the case of a stock ETF. It's just like a legal agreement, and people can't really steal that from you. In the case of Bitcoin, it's a little bit more complicated. So the ETF typically has to have something called a custodian. The custodian is a company that just sort of holds the underlying assets on behalf of the ETF. Now, the custodian of a Bitcoin ETF is at risk of cyber attack in all of the same ways that a lot of Bitcoin exchanges have been. So it's very easy for someone, or they sort of point a big target on their back when they own a lot of Bitcoin. And if there's sort of one big centralized custodian, which amazingly, this is sort of how this market is shaking out. Almost all of the new Bitcoin ETFs are using the same custodian. That custodian that's now owning tons and tons of Bitcoin is a very, very tempting target for sort of bad actors like hackers or thieves, or a coordinated state actor like Russia or North Korea. So that's kind of the security threat I would be worried about. On the consumer protection side, I think Professor Park sort of mentioned this. There's a sort of extreme price volatility in cryptocurrencies, and it's not super obvious that it's good for consumers or it's good for investors to have easy access to this kind of thing. Now, it's not necessarily the regulator's role to sort of save consumers from themselves, but they should be cognizant of the idea that sort of by making Bitcoin very easy for people to invest in, you may bring more people into this market, and these are people who maybe should be paying down their credit card or saving in a more prudent way rather than speculating on this super volatile financial asset.
Right, I see. Professor Park, I understand the US itself is not the first country to have approved Bitcoin ETFs. And that being said, could you tell us a bit about the other countries that already host this product?
Yes, and from now on, over nearly 200 sovereign states, but only eight countries operational Bitcoin's ETF can openly trade it in stock exchange markets. But among that, the most representative country is Brazil, Canada, Germany, and Australia is the most representative countries now. Actually, Canada is the most leading country among the global markets. They can trade it up to 7 Bitcoins ETF in their market. Also, Canada authorities responded positively due to their based on approved Bitcoins ETF in the prior time, because a lot of investors in the perspective of both institutional or private investors can gather in Canada market after they approve of Bitcoin ETFs in their markets. And also, Germany is the second country, and they first launched in 2020. And also, these days, Brazil is also a very leading country in the global market, because a lot of investors can gather Brazilian markets, and also they are evaluated as the first significant steps or significant efforts to adopt cryptocurrency in Brazil's financial existing markets. So I think a lot of the size and the number of Bitcoin's ETF markets in the global world will be increased gradually and will be more expected in the future.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Buchak, you've already shared your skepticism with regard to Bitcoin-related endeavors, but do pardon the cliche. It says there are two sides to every coin. That being said, if I were to ask you now to identify perhaps a potential gain of this particular approval, what would you say?
Right. So like I said, I don't think people should be speculating on Bitcoin or crypto more generally. But if they are going to do it, I think these spot Bitcoin ETFs do have some advantages over other ways to invest in Bitcoin. So one is that it's just much easier for less tech-savvy people than holding Bitcoin and using a digital wallet. There's all these stories out there of people like losing their wallet and all their Bitcoins are gone. There's a sort of more regulatory oversight in something like this than in many crypto exchanges, and I'm thinking of FTX as an example of how these exchanges can fail, and there's more protection with the spot ETF. And then compared to existing fund structures like the Bitcoin futures ETF that we mentioned, spot Bitcoin ETFs, they actually tend to be a little cheaper in the sense that they have lower fees. So it's something like 1% management fee for the futures ETF, for the typical futures ETF, versus 20 or 25 basis points for a spot ETF. So that's a lot lower. Now, that said, I think that the greatest gains for this development will probably accrue to the big investment managers who are going to be running these things. And then, finally, I think it's sort of worth pointing out a certain irony in all of this. Now, a lot of people kind of initially had interest in Bitcoin and in crypto more generally because they thought it would kind of enable this more decentralized financial system. And it's supposed to allow these financial transactions to happen directly between people rather than through big financial intermediaries. But instead, what we've seen is there's this big trend of crypto and Bitcoin just being brought more and more inside the traditional financial system. So Bitcoin ETFs are just the latest example of that. Now, these transactions are happening increasingly through centralized exchanges and not on this like decentralized blockchain, which is sort of how people originally imagined it. So if you're someone who just wants to gamble with cryptocurrency, this is great news. It's way easier to gamble. It's way cheaper. It's way more accessible. But if you're a true believer in this DeFi idea, you might find this a little bit discouraging. And in some sense, it's sort of confirmation that the traditional financial system really is faster and cheaper and more efficient than this decentralized system that Bitcoin was originally going for.
Right, point well taken. Professor Park, you mentioned earlier that South Korea is opting to take a more proactive stance with regard to Bitcoin, especially to better protect its private investors. But what conditions could perhaps encourage South Korea to open its own doors to Bitcoin ETFs, do you think?
Yeah, Korea now shows a very cautious stance now, but in the future, to open the door Bitcoin's ETF in Korean market, there are a lot of things be required in advance, but the most important is that to establish some of stable regulatory systems and technology advancements, and also we can require some of education and improve the awareness of investors. Actually, now Korea already has some existing well-stable and well-established financial regulatory systems, but cryptocurrency, including Bitcoin ETF, this is based on the emerging technology, so it is now well-equipped to fully handle the cryptocurrencies. So in the future, Korea has to make some well-established regulatory systems to be equipped with fully handled perfectly in the cryptocurrency market. And also we can consider a lot of things to technology advancements. It means some of cryptocurrency has a little bit risks in the perspective of securities. So to open the door in the Korean market, we have to more proactively adopt some of new technology advancements to protect investors' risks from some of frauds, money laundering, or some of financial crimes based on their technology advancements. And also we can consider that a lot of things can be required, all the regular systems, technology advancements, and also, as I said, some of education and awareness to improve investors' perception is also needed. So we can finally summarize that it cannot be handled only one systems or only a solely regulatory framework. And some of small experts cannot handle or cannot open the door slower to adopt Bitcoin's ETF in Korean market. So a lot of comprehensive frameworks can be adopted in the perspective of as a whole systems and based on the financial in Korean governments and some of existing Korean markets.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor Buchak, beyond Bitcoin, we just started the year 2024, and as a professor in the arena of finance, what are your words of advice, perhaps, to individual investors seeking to better ensure their financial stability this year?
Sure. This is kind of boring advice. It's not going to get me a lot of views on social media, but the real answer is just to keep it simple. So don't buy more than you can afford. Pay down high interest rate debt. So if you have a credit card balance, do whatever you can to pay it off. Invest the rest of what you want to save in a diversified, low-fee, passive equity index fund or ETF. If you're a little older, maybe you put some of that money in a similar bond fund that has a little less risk. So like if you're here in America, buy the Vanguard Total Stock Market ETF. You're investing in the whole economy. It's diversified. It's real companies doing real things. The expense ratio is 3 basis points, so you're not wasting all your money giving it to some manager who's taking a lot of fees. The price will go up, price will go down. Try not to worry about it too much. When the price goes down, don't panic and sell. It'll go up on average over the long term. Now, if as a hobby, you want to speculate on stocks or Bitcoin, that's fine, but just recognize that you're gambling. Vegas is probably more fun, and you'll probably lose money either way. So don't spend your retirement or your kids' college savings doing that. And just also recognize that for every story you hear where someone got rich playing the stock market or betting on Bitcoin, there's a lot more people who lost that money, and you'll never hear about them.
Right. Point well taken again, Professor Buchak. And Professor Park, speaking briefly, because we have about a minute left, what are your words of advice to private investors here on the local front in Korea, that is, with regard to their financial decisions for this year?
Yes, maybe this time season to approve Bitcoin's ETF, approve in US. This is maybe a very good or meaningful time to investors. But investors always have to try to perceive this cryptocurrency, including Bitcoin ETF, as very emerging technologies. So they have to always try to get some of the newest and latest information related on regular systems or technologies. And also they do not require and adopt some of fake news or some of speculations, because these days a lot of fake news and some of contents which is not identified true as fact. So the cryptocurrency market is driven very easily based on those fake news or some of speculations in cryptocurrency market. So always investors try to figure out which news is true or not. The most important is that.
Right, of course. Professor Park, thank you so much for your advice. And Professor Buchak, thank you very much for your words of wisdom as well. Right, well, on that note, we end Thursday's edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. Do join us again same time tomorrow.
So, you want a special experience?